Hello everyone, it's Oliver Harper here. For this spoiler discussion on Ghostbusters Afterlife, I'm joined by Ghostbusters fan and expert Paul Gannon to explore more of the film's plot and if it delivers on being a proper third entry in the series, and if the heavy fan service was warranted or they went too far with it. So Paul, I've already explored some of my thoughts on the film. I very much enjoyed it, but there are issues with it. I know you had managed to see an early screening and you had passed on some of your thoughts to me after the viewing, which left me a bit surprised. So for my audience, as a hardcore fan of the franchise, did Afterlife meet your expectations or leave you disappointed?
Okay, so I'm going to start by saying this is my opening gambit, right? I'm super depressed that I did not like this film. It's really bummed me out in a way I've never experienced with anything before. So,
oh man,
it's just weird because so when I first came out of the screening, because I saw it about 3 weeks ago through the Sony screening room thing, whatever, because they invited me to the main premiere, but I was like, I'm still not comfortable with COVID and big cinemas and things and all that kind of stuff. So that's the only reason why I got to see it that early, really, was because they let me see it early. But anyway, I came out of that screening confused initially. My initial response was confused, and all I had was questions that always began with, why did they do that? Why did they do that? And as I've stewed on it, then I went to see it Thursday, just to kind of, give it with an audience and see it with an audience. And when I saw it with an audience, I came out angry.
Oh no.
And this is the thing. So many people I know in the Ghostbusters community, people I really love and respect and trust and have had great conversations with, adore the film, love it. Some of them have been crying over it, which I don't know about that, but they've taken to it, and I totally see why. But for me, I don't want to sound too hyperbolic because I hate that. I don't think you get anything out of hyperbolic statements when it comes to this. But this might be the worst film I've ever seen in a cinema.
Oh my god, that is
in a cinema.
A pretty harsh assessment, man.
Yeah, I know, but how do I walk back on that a bit? Because so personally speaking, maybe it was a really dispiriting experience, if you pardon the pun.
Because you said you walked out angry on your second viewing.
I guess it wasn't so much angry as...
Was it because down to the audience were reacting completely different to you? Because when I saw it on the Thursday, people were clapping and cheering at very specific moments. That was, the fan service nostalgic button, beep beep beep, and everyone's like, everyone clapped and cheered.
No, the cinema I was with quite subdued actually when I saw it, and that's just the roll of the dice. They mostly seem to love it, and the kids liked it. Look, the bottom line is, if kids go see it and they like it, great. That's who it's directly for, and it works. It's not so much angry about their reaction. It was more like, why aren't I enjoying it like you are? Do you know? Like, I was frustrated more with myself with this whole sense of, you're loving it, and I'm jealous of that, I guess.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can describe it. So I don't know. This is the first Ghostbusters film that I think I'm done with now that I've seen it twice. And that's horrible coming out of my mouth.
Wow. Because the only time I can look back on this at a similar situation, in comparison to you in terms of your disappointment, yours is kind of more to the extreme, but when Superman Returns came out, I couldn't form an opinion on it after seeing it. I just didn't know what to say. It didn't leave me excited, it didn't leave me annoyed. I was just like somewhat confused.
Yeah.
Because it was a film essentially on paper for me, but it didn't deliver on what I was expecting. Now, if you look at Afterlife, those early trailers we saw, it was a complete shift in terms of its location. So in my review, I said, New York City is very much part of Ghostbusters. It's it's a character in itself as well. So shifting location, to me, I felt somewhat disconnected from the film quite early on. And then I sort of got invested in the characters, and I liked Phoebe and Podcast and, the character Gary, played by Paul Rudd. I like that group dynamic.
And I will just say at this point, they were my favourite parts of the film. In fact, anytime they were on screen together, they were the times I were enjoying the film easily. It's like, I don't want to say I think, because here's the film. I don't want to go ahead and say, oh, I think it's shit, it's crap, and everyone who likes it's an idiot. It's like, it's not. I understand why it's made, and I can see where it works. It's just there are certain things that happen early on that are bad signs, and then there's a crash of the wave in terms of when I went from going, this film's all right, it's for kids, to going, I actually now hate this movie. But it just feels like there are bits in it I wish they'd focused more on. And that, Phoebe McKenna Grace, is fantastic in the film. And she is the, MVP of the whole film.
So in terms of, like, its plot, right? So very early on, we are seeing Egon attempting to sort of trap Poltergeist spirit, whatever. He's chasing after him. He gets taken in the chair.
Yeah, this is where it gets fuzzy already. That's the problem.
So from the get-go, you're very much like, this is not how I would have done it, or this is going completely downhill straight away.
So here's the thing. When the film starts, because obviously this is heavily spoiled, so unfortunately, if people are listening to this who haven't seen it, then this is on them. But when I realised how much Egon would, quote-unquote, be in this film, I was actually quite impressed and mortified at the same time. So the beginning with Egon, with that pre-credit sequence, I was kind of like, oh, this is interesting. I like this. I kind of like the way they're doing it, where it's not upfront, it's kind of in shadow and things. And then when I saw the terror dog, my brain went, oh, fuck off. Because they couldn't just reveal it. They had to reveal it coming through a chair like it did with Dana, which makes no conceptual sense other than you remember it from the 84 film. And every criticism I can put down to this film is when it goes, do you remember 1984? Because if it did less of that, it would have been its own thing. And I probably would have been happier with it.
Your biggest problem, fundamentally, is the overuse on fan service.
Yeah, I would say this might be the most insecure movie I've ever seen, where it's trying to make everyone happy. And does in some cases, but I think ultimately when you try and spread your cards out of what you want in this film, and then you realised, you're just jamming things in, and the film becomes effectively an Easter egg hunt, it feels less like a movie and more of a kind of, you remember this, don't you? Come on, you remember this. And when you've got a plot based on that, I feel it's a disservice to the new characters you're trying to create.
So Jason Reitman has said recently in an interview that he made the film for his father and Harold Ramis's family. I mean, could that somewhat be an excuse to sort of justify why there's a lot of fan service? I mean, on paper, or, I think fundamentally Jason, before seeing this film, I thought, it was very much the right choice to direct this because he had that lineage there. He was kind of around Ghostbusters most of his life. So obviously he was apprehensive about taking a job, I believe. I think he may have took some persuasion because these aren't the sort of films he makes.
Not at all.
I think he has essentially made a film that is a love letter to his father and Harold Ramis's family and the Ghostbusters itself. But do you think that is inherently sort of being problematic for to sort of pursue a sequel that would genuinely move the series forward?
So this is the way I've phrased it. I've spoken to a few people who are big fans like me, and weirdly, we've all come on the same side of this argument. And the way I can describe it is, when did Ghostbusters stop being Dan Aykroyd's passion project and start becoming a Reitman heirloom? Because Ghostbusters was not a project Reitman initially wanted to do because of the scale of Dan Aykroyd's script, and it took Harold Ramis to kind of dismantle it and put it back together into something a bit more recognisably human. And so for me, Ghostbusters is Dan Aykroyd. It's Dan Aykroyd's identity, it's his beliefs, but it's also Harold Ramis's humanity. It's his character. Because Dan Aykroyd's good on ideas, but he's not great on character. Harold Ramis is great on character. And so that first film works because of the alchemy of those two characters. Now we're being told, oh, it's a Reitman property. And it's like, I find that disingenuous to Dan Aykroyd, who, you read every making of book and it's all about, oh, my dad was a psychic. I have ghosts, he was a ghost hunter. We have ghost hunters in our family and psychics in our family. He loves UFOs. This was a love of his love of the supernatural and his love of Bob Hope films and things like that. And fundamentally, the film is just stripes with ghosts in. And that's why it works, because it's an office comedy that just happens to be set in the supernatural world. And even though I can understand, because of the current temperature of film, wanting to revamp it for a family audience and making it for younger kids, I get that because of, kids enjoying things like this. It's not what Ghostbusters is. Every sequel now has failed to try and capture the magic of that first film. And you just come away going, maybe we don't need any more Ghostbusters anymore.
Well, it's the same problem RoboCop's had, hasn't it? Since the first film, that part is like Ghostbusters 2 and RoboCop 2. There's always elements of those movies that people love, and there's also kind of on the flip side of that, has a lot of issues. And then you got the kind of third entry, then you got the remake and TV shows, whatever. So RoboCop has never really found its footing either with its sort of continued storyline.
Yeah.
In the first Ghostbusters film, Venkman says, Ray Stantz is the heart of the Ghostbusters. Would it have made more sense and been, I suppose, less problematic in terms of the sort of schmaltzy kind of ending we get, which people love and people got very, teary-eyed about, and some people may have felt it was in bad taste. That Ray should have been the one that sort of gone off and done his own thing because he was the one who was like most passionate.
Oh God, where do I even start? Do you know, there are two versions of me in this conversation right now. There's the critic who's trying to step back and be distant and say, as a film, what is it? Does it work? And then there's the Paul Gannon who saw every cartoon, has seen all the films, read all the books, knows it inside and out, loves it, loves the world, who is screaming at the screen going, why are you presenting these characters this way? And the only character with any fidelity from one film to the other is Bill Murray, who obviously was just asked to come in and be Bill Murray, So I'm just going to start with, in terms of plot, my instant reaction to the opening scene, because, Egon's living on his own, and it becomes apparent that he's guarding this second gate that Shandor built to, get Zool back, which, strictly speaking, would be the first gate, and the building would have been the second in the timeline, if that makes sense. Which doesn't make sense, by the way. But anyway, so we are told by Dan Aykroyd that Egon just one day took all the equipment, closed it all down, and buggered off and left them all high and dry, and didn't tell them why. And I, first of all, fundamentally don't agree the character of Egon would do that. And I fundamentally don't agree that even if he did, and it was about Gozer, he wouldn't have told the three other people in his life that went through that with him and know all about it. So why is this particular version of Gozer more dangerous? And why did he go off and do it on his own? I don't buy that. It's like when we talk about too much 84 in it and like what they could have done instead, my thing is like, why not give Egon a curse, right? He gets some kind of curse, like the Bye-Bye Man, where if he mentioned it to someone, they get the curse or whatever. So he has to pull himself out drastically to save his family and friends, and he abandons them because he can't tell them why, because of this supernatural curse, and he's working on it alone to try and fix the problem, and he dies before fixing it. And so when his family turn up to inherit the house, they unfortunately inherit the curse, and they have to battle to save themselves. And they could have a new villain, and then that whole plot would make sense, and you can still drop in all the proton packs and the gear and do things that you have to. You could keep it almost beat for beat the same film, but why all the 84 shit other than you remember this? And that is what brings the film down for me. It's sad because everyone's acting, everyone seems to be enjoying themselves, it looks good. I don't understand why they went with this plot. That's what it ultimately comes down to. If Ghostbusters fans are that forgiving to seeing the old guard come back, fine. But why does it have to be filtered through the comparison I make is this, not tonally, but structurally, it's very similar to Rob Zombie's Halloween, in that it spends a lot of time setting up new characters and a new world and a new version of Michael Myers for 50 minutes. And then in the last half an hour, it literally retells Halloween again, beat for beat, but without that nuance and just with a lot of, oh, you remember that from the original?
Well, you were saying to me that it was very much like Goosebumps, but with that Ghostbusters kind of tacked on the end with the third act plot.
Yeah. It's almost exactly the same as the Goosebumps movie that came out Sony. I was surprised. I made it as a joke initially, but then I rewatched it the other day while I was doing the ironing, and I was like, this is it. If you take out Jack Black's character, functionally serves as the same as Harold Ramis's character in Afterlife, and there's similar kind of things about inheritance and releasing things from the past that they have to get back in with their knowledge. But that film worked for me because I never read those books, so it was kind of like, this is all new. This works if you haven't read the books, or if you have, because all the ghosts are staple things like puppet, werewolf, mummy, vampire. You know what I mean?
As you were sort of pointing out, like it's kind of very much reliance on the 84 movie to say, pointing at stuff and going, you remember this. In some situations, I would be just as frustrated as you. And there are parts of it where I did kind of roll my eyes, when I saw this sort of, a nod or a wink to the 84 film, especially with the crunchy wrapper she finds. And I was like,
oh, and the Twinkie falling out of the car as well.
I thought it's a little bit too far there. But it's not it wasn't enough to sort of get me really angry. I suppose because I was invested in the characters, I was actually more interested in that plot of them just getting used to the town and sort of interacting with other people and just seeing how they sort of discover the secrets of the house, more so than waiting around for them to do some ghost busting.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an odd thing to sort of think about, because it's a Ghostbusters film and you're there to watch ghost busting action, and to me, I wasn't that kind of drawn towards that through this movie. I was kind of more interested in the characters, and I think that's kind of what Jason Reitman is very good at as a director, because this is essentially an indie movie with ghosts and science fiction kind of thrown into it, and those little indie moments I really like.
Yeah, no, I think that's on the money, yeah.
And the discussions the kids have, especially when Phoebe meets Podcast, it had this great vibe to it, but it felt like an 80s movie with its kind of, just with how the dialogue is delivered and what they're saying.
Yeah, it certainly felt more appropriate than like a lot of current kids' adventure movies, which are reasonably bland. This one did have shades of grey to the characters, or certainly, there was a little bit more going on underneath in those early stretches, whereas a lot of modern kids' films, they're all ciphers for the special effects. This at least developed their character somewhat.
Yeah, sure. And there's other characters we introduced to, like Lucky and Trevor. I mean, Lucky, I thought was somewhat of a bit of a redundant character who just seems to tag along by the end. Her father's taken out the mix very quickly, which is kind of, I thought he'd appear come the third act to sort of say, oh, okay, this is to observe what's going on and get reactions, because they cut out, because we're jumping forward a bit here, but the third act is like the townsfolk are essentially kind of cut out the movie. You get this kind of quick reactions of the spirits kind of whizzing through. People see the zombie guy in a diner, and there's a couple of the ghosts. One of the ghosts being one of the toys we saw as a kid from the real Ghostbusters, which was like, I was like, okay, I quite like that. I thought that was the one toy they put in. I thought was quite cool, because I still vividly remember that toy. As long as I didn't put in like the toilet that sort of opens up like a mouth, that was weird.
No, you see, here's where we differ. I would have rather have had the toilet ghost. I would love that. If they put a fright figure in, you're like the bin man who becomes a fly or something, or the cop that becomes a skeleton. I would have adored that. That would have been great. That's a real deep dive.
But then we are, seeing a lot of, because Act 1 and 2 have a generally nice pace to them. There is a great build-up for me as we sort of, they discover their connection to Egon and the Ghostbusters. Weirdly, that even though it is a sequel from the 89 film, the only reference they make to the 89 film, the sequel, is Raise a Cult. There's no...
Oh, don't even get me started on this. Don't, please, God, no.
Because of watching videos of, like, the events from the first film and the sort of advertising they did to advertise their services as Ghostbusters. But there's nothing about the slide, nothing about Vigo.
No.
And I was like, oh, why do they kind of ignore that? Even though it was less successful and it was, kind of somewhat panned by the critics at the time, it's still very much part of everything Ghostbusters.
Okay, so plot structurally, it makes no sense to ignore Ghostbusters 2, because when they go into the chamber and they find out the numbers on the wall are all dates of supernatural cataclysms, right? And 84's on there for the the cross rip. Why wasn't 89 on there either?
Yeah,
because it doesn't serve the plot, which had these time jumps between the events. All things name checked in the opening scenes of Ghostbusters, by the way, which is ridiculous. But it effectively says that whatever happened in 89 wasn't big enough to be worthy of the cataclysm needed to bring about Gozer again, right? And I'm like, well, that makes no sense. And then secondly, it's heavily implied when they had the conversation with Dan Aykroyd over the phone that after 84, they did their job too well and the company naturally closed because they ran out of ghosts. And then whatever happened, then Egon pissed off. So it suggests that Ghostbusters 2 didn't happen. And Ecto 1 is the model from the first film. Jason Reitman this is where I get nerdy again, I'm so sorry. Jason Reitman recently went, Ghostbusters 2 is canon because Ray's a Cult's bookshop and there's a toaster in the background. And I'm like, that means nothing, really. But you've also ignored it in your plot. So you're having your cake and eating it by saying it doesn't matter to the plot, but it matters to them Easter eggs that were scattering across the film. Because it also depressed me when Winston went, basically, Ray's a loser and his book's up shit, so I've been paying his rent to keep him happy. And it's like, that's terrible. That's really sad to hear. So anyway, so Ghostbusters 2 happened. And Jason Reitman saying, oh, yeah, well then, yeah, during Ghostbusters 2, that's when Egon had his kid. We just didn't know about it at the time. We didn't know he had a daughter. And I'm like, no, Egon never had a relationship with anyone because he had his science.
There's plot holes with the family itself, because the mother, we don't know who her partner was. We don't know who Egon's, the woman his girlfriend at the time, or we don't know, it could have been his wife. Nothing's really explored that way. It could be hinted that Janine, it's not Janine, is it? I mean, even though she has this kind of, she's supervised or looked after Egon in his later years. And, the post-credit sequence, or literally after the credits, we see that clip. It plays an old clip from the 84 film, like a deleted scene. So trying to show there is this connection there, but there's no...
Well, I'm just trying to figure out the age of it all. How old? Because Carrie Coon is 40. So she would have been born in 81. So let's just say they're going by her real age. That means she was conceived before the events of Ghostbusters, right? So if that doesn't happen, let's just say we have to cut out 8-9 years to get to Ghostbusters 2, right? Well, that would make her, let's say 31. And that's theoretically possible in terms of her age and then having a daughter who would know nothing of it. But I refuse to believe Carrie Coon's character didn't know anything about Egon's history as a Ghostbuster at all. That blows my mind.
Egon is, from my eyes, was always somewhat of a secretive character. He never discussed anything other than work. So, they could have implied that he had this kind of other life previously, or that, in the future that he would have had a partner. But it didn't really... I mean, it was fine for them to continue with Egon's family, but I think more explanation could have been thrown in and not have it be so sort of left to the viewer to sort of fill in the gaps or just apply loads of guesswork.
I think it's just, again, because I don't think it's a very good script overall, because I think whatever good was in the script is probably drowned out by the time you get to the third act. And I think a lot of stuff was cut out to get to that third act. And then they ran out of time to make the third act have any kind of emotional weight outside of, oh, look, there's Ghost Egon. That's sad. I was just, I don't know. It's frustrating because I feel like they could have told a simpler story and had the same effect.
Well, with the reintroduction of Gozer, do you think that was just fundamentally lazy? Because at the end of the first film, you could look at it that they defeated Gozer and destroyed that god, or it just severed that connection to that dimension, and they were still kind of around.
The film suggests that Gozer didn't die, but what it also suggests was all they did was, temporarily shut the door on that portal. If you want to get nerdy about it, IDW has done loads of comics, obviously, and their opinion on that is all that door did was open up all the other dimensions and supernatural worlds, and it became like a kind of a weak point in the planes between existences. And so Gozer has come back in the comic strip, and like it made sense, but it was used very differently in a very different context. And also, it's a comic book, so have at it, have fun, because no one at the time knew there was ever going to be a new Ghostbusters, or certainly this film. So have at it, have fun. It's Phoebe, right? She's your main protagonist. She's what the audience gets behind. She discovers her grandfather was a Ghostbuster. She learns all this. And then she inherits 70-year-old men's backstory and plot. And it's like, no, give that character something unique. Give a completely new challenge that defines who she is and what the next generation of Ghostbusters are going to do. And to do the Gozer thing just reeks of marketing and pleasing fans with fan service. And I know people have said, well, nothing wrong with fan service, but it's like, not when your whole film's based around it.
Well, it's the avoidance of risk, isn't there? And that is the case with trying to really please the fan base after the 2016 movie. That is, I think that very much was a key point in, I would presume, very much from Sony's side, to sort of say, hey, we've got to play this up to the fans. And other critics have pointed out that there is this kind of Force Awakens kind of similarities, especially when they did the marketing. That one of the trailers was very much the Force Awakens trailer they put out, in terms of like just the structure of the trailer and the sort of rhythm of it. This very much is kind of following a similar path.
I think the difference is, though, that Force Awakens homages, or whatever you want to call it, are implicit, where they're not up front and centre. They're kind of like, oh, that strikes a chord. You walk away from the film and you go, oh yeah, that was just a New Hope.
Yes.
But in the film, those things are implicit more in the score and the wipes and the little callbacks here and there. It's not as if they literally.
I suppose that's integral to Star Wars' kind of tapestry, isn't it? Like sort of its universe.
Yeah, it's more like it's maintaining the tone of the first Star Wars rather than the exact plot of the first Star Wars. Whereas this isn't that. This is like, look at this, look at this, look at this, remember that, look at this, we're doing that again, we're doing that. And there's that subtle difference between being implicit in your callbacks and explicit, and Ghostbusters was too explicit for me.
Yeah. The musical score very much relies on the original themes by Elmer Bernstein.
I didn't like the score.
You didn't like the score at all. That is that's a shame, because I thought the score was wonderful. I think there is enough new stuff in there by Rob Simonson. Like, I think obviously what's been put out on terms of trivia and things like that is like Elmer's son has helped out supervise the score as well, behind the scenes.
But you think, but this is the problem, isn't it? It's like you could do. Even Ghostbusters 2 had a score that was very different from the first film. And on reflection, I appreciate that score now more than I did before I saw this film, because that score gives Ghostbusters 2 a vibe. When you hear certain bits of that score, you think of, Walking Down, there's that scene where they're painting up Vigo, or that
you think of Ghostbusters 2, don't you? It's sort of it fits its tone and direction.
Why couldn't they have just done a new score full stop? Just because you want to make a whole film about Easter eggs. I don't know. It really took me out of the movie personally, because it was too much like how the music was used in the video game, which was like, you recognise these beats and these scores and these things. Let's just
the video game very much copy and pasted what had been already composed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They didn't. I don't think they created new stuff. They may have done. I think maybe they may have sort of to link sequences together, but it did very much feel like, well, let's take track 2 from the soundtrack and put it here, and don't really do much with it. Don't change it. Just keep it how it is.
Yeah.
The argument is, it's like Elmer Bernstein, he's created the themes for Ghostbusters, right? So that is the kind of the musical world of the film. So generally with sequels, composers will come on. If they change composer, often they adapt that music and fit it for the new film. In the case of like the Superman sequels or Jurassic Park 3, you had different composer, Don Davis come on. But sometimes they go with something completely different, very much like Rocky 4 had a completely different score. Also with Ghostbusters 2, we had something completely different. And I think maybe at the time, I don't know, maybe some fans were a bit disappointed the music had changed and it lost a bit of the magic. But now they've sort of brought it back. It's, for a fan, Paul, it's completely done the reverse on you. It's really annoyed you.
Well, it was just because let me put it this way. When I think back on the film and I think back on the moments when, the score is poked out at me, it's because it feels like they've taken a piece of music that was written for a specific scene in the first film, and then they've transposed it by and large to another scene of just Phoebe and podcast talking on the street. And it's like, so you've made that music a shorthand for upbeat, idle conversation, witty chat scene in a sitcom-y way. And so it just feels like they've taken the recognizable leitmotifs and familiar chords of the Ghostbusters film, but they haven't used them right. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know. And I definitely know what you're saying. Yeah.
So that's why it's like, okay, this is just me personally speaking. This is just me. This is not a criticism on anyone else's opinion on the film, but like, give me something new. And for the first half of that film, I was reasonably enjoying the new. I liked the discovery. I liked it, but that just got chipped away as we headed to. I mean, I think most people have said this, and I'm not the first, but like, for me, the film dies the minute it gets to Walmart.
Oh, well, yeah, that's, often the case. It annoys people with this very much heavy on product placement.
It's more, I can forgive that because, it's Sony and that's all they do. But
they're not shy about it, are they?
It's the moment when the film goes from being its own thing to suddenly becoming very slavishly faithful to 84, but not doing it as well. Like, for instance, people are going, oh, there's no one in Walmart. I was like, yeah, because they've built a Walmart in the middle of nowhere in this weird Oklahoma town that has 80 people in. Why would there be a fully staffed Walmart? That makes no sense. But also, you've got the scene built up around basically the same scene that happens to Lewis Tully in Ghostbusters, where
because Gary is basically playing that character now, isn't he?
Yeah, and that's horrible for his character because he deserved to be more into the action than just be written out basically to become a dog. But regarding all that, it just like there's no tension in that scene at all. The building is brightly lit. The introduction of the terror dog is silly. It's preempted by a Minions-esque scene of Marshmallow Men, which again conceptually don't make sense and are only in there because the thing is that's not fan service to me. Fan service is when they drove past and there was a poster of Stay Puft on the wall. And it was like a ghost poster. Yeah. It'd been faded for years, and I thought,
that sequence for me, it plays out quite well at the beginning because we see Paul Rudd being Paul Rudd. He's when he walks into Walmart, he's got that little swagger and strut to himself. It's like he's going to do a little bit of a dance, which I thought was brilliant. And then there's a little bit of the horror element where he hears someone scream. And I thought, oh, this could play out quite well here. But because it's all through his eyes and not through the terror dog that's kind of stalking him, that sort of took away any sort of scary moment that it could have been. I wasn't... And it was very much playing more on the comedy. It wasn't really playing on the scares because when in the original one where Rick Moranis is kind of getting chased and you see the dog through its eyes kind of walking towards him, that had that extra horror element. And I think this is what's kind of happened with this. It is more of a family film. It has the comedy there. It's not as sharp or as witty as the original film, but it's a different sensibility because it is you've got children in the mix, so you've got to change things around, I think.
But I also disagree because I think that if, by that logic, the kids who fell in love with the film in 84, there were 3 really scary scenes in the 84 movie, the library scene. And it's like, kids don't mind that stuff as long as it's not gratuitous. And my only instinct was to think, why didn't the lights go out in the Walmart? Or why didn't it go dark and make it more threatening? Because the scene could have played out the same. But having it so brightly lit just kind of, it turned it into something goofy. It turned it into that scene from Star Wars Last Jedi when they released the animals, in the casino. It felt more goofy. And I'm thinking, this is meant to be a threat. And it was a threat to Rick Moranis because the shock of its reveal and then the frosty of its chase and how he's kind of bemused and frightened. And it leads into that comedy but cruel scene where everyone just sees him for one, in terms of the audience's point of view at that time in the film, they just turn and watch him die in the restaurant and then he's dragged away.
Well, yes, the sort of comment on sort of high society ignoring the lower class, sort of thing,
I disagree that just because it was a family film, they couldn't push on the horror. And I feel like if they bumped that scene up and made it a genuine threat, it would have raised the stakes for the film. But unfortunately, the film already knows that it's not a threat because he's just going to get turned into a dog.
Well, it's like, with Phoebe's mother, she'd, starts experiencing stuff and then the terror dog gets her. That, maybe because I was watching an IMAX with this kind of big sound, it did make me jump. I was like, whoa, but it was all played in the dark.
Yeah.
So that kind of worked.
It was, but it worked as a jump scare without context. It was just like, we have to do this now.
Oh, yeah, that's essentially what it is. That's what.
But when you look at how that happens to Dana in the film, it has a jump scare, but it's really misleading. It's one of the reasons why I think it's lightning. We all say about lightning in a bottle, but I think that film worked because I think the technicians involved in that scene helped build how that played out. And so you've got this scene where she's sitting down.
You've got tension.
Yeah.
Tension building up.
You've got tension. And then you have that scene where in the corner of her eye, she sees the door begin to mutate and stretch and things like that. And that's when she knows something is wrong. And the audience are in that same position mentally with her. So when the arms pop out, that isn't a out of context.
Yeah, because she's not confused, is she? She just goes, oh shit. And then the audience is like, oh bollocks, this is going to go down really badly.
And then we all see it, and it's terrifying, that scene, when you see it for the first time, because the way it builds up, the lovely dolly of the camera going along with the chair as it's being dragged into the doorway, there's a sense of threat. And at that point in the film, you don't know what's happened to those two characters, and it's quite distressing. The remake doesn't have that element of surprise or threat because we know how this plays out, and the film knows that. So when it gets to it, it makes a kind of a mockery of it, and then it plays it up for weird laughs, like when Paul Rudd and her meet in the desert for no reason and talk like dogs for a bit. And I was like, my questions were, why do they do that? Why can't I hear what they're saying? And where did she get that dress from?
Well, yeah, she sort of magically made it appear, because I always thought it was something that Dana might have had in her her wardrobe, she sometimes had a bit of bad taste, or she had like, no, because Wakeman points out, she just like, look at all the junk food. So she's not like, she's got this persona of this kind of well-to-do woman, but behind all that, she's got this kind of junk food mentality, or has like some shitty clothing in the cupboard. But yeah, actually, that moment there when they do meet, I mean, in terms of, because I mentioned earlier about Lucky and her father disappearing out of the equation for the third act.
And we're a podcast parent to all this.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, yeah. What's he been up to? You know, Paul Rudd's character Gary, he is off screen for a long time, because once he's kind of been taken over by the terror dog, he just kind of vanishes. Then until we find him sabotaging the trap, you know, that Egon has set up to subdue the sort of spirits breaking through.
Yeah.
And he had this kind of flower in his ear. So there must be moments they've cut out where he's kind of maybe strutting through the town, just being Paul Rudd, you know, or just being stupid, to sort of play up the comedy.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shame to sort of push him to the side, because he would have been, if he didn't become a terror dog, I think he would have been quite handy in the sort of helping the kids deal with this, because they're children. You know, in the first one, you've got adults who are just being put through a lot of crap to sort of save the day, where the kids are, it seems, I suppose, less of a struggle, you know, for them to sort of deal with, so to speak. I mean, the character Trevor, I mean, he himself, he fixes the Ecto-1, but doesn't really have much to play in this story until the end, when he sort of just, you know, uses the proton pack to sort of power this massive trap under the ground.
Yeah, he uses it to power the generator, doesn't he? And he's like, how did you know that? How did you know how to do that?
Yeah. As we're going through this now, you know, I'm highlighting things that you can pick apart this movie very easily, you know, and then criticize it and go, well, this is not working, or this is kind of too much fan service. Even though I was kind of watching it and still kind of thinking, okay, that doesn't make sense, or this character should have had more development, more writing here, it didn't really detract too much from my enjoyment, because I walked out of the movie feeling really good, and maybe it's down to the fact that I wasn't offended by it, or just like left kind of heartbroken to an extent, because I love Ghostbusters, and and in my mind I always think, okay, if they did a third one, this is how it should play out. But each one of us who adore those movies all have our own idea of how a Ghostbusters film should be, and I always find it baffling where they, so many times now, they just can't get it right, either just down to, you know, the creatives involved, or someone having a bigger voice than the others and leading, you know, the story in a completely different direction, or just playing it safe and repeating things without any creativity kind of thrown into the mix to offer the fan base something completely new. But if you go that way, offer something completely new, the fans may turn against you and go, well, where's the Ghostbuster stuff? They'll feel more disconnected than before.
The issue isn't so much as the execution as the climate of cinema now. So you look at Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, and they're made in a time when the formula of making movies were, let's give this a go. Oh, it was a success. Great. Can we have another one quick? And then you make the film based on that impetus, right? And so Ghostbusters 2 kind of has, I mean, there's a long history about why Ghostbusters 2 took so long to come out after its success, but all it had to do was be a sequel. You know what I mean? It had to be more of the same. And that's what I think largely Ghostbusters 2 gets right, if nothing else. Forgetting 2016 right now, because my argument for 2016 is it was trying to be a Marvel movie. Not so much the Marvel universe, but it was trying to be a Marvel movie, but it was also fighting against the legacy of Ghostbusters and the tone of the comedy. And it all became a bit of a mishmash, and what you take out of that is what you put in. With this one, they're now looking at the climate. Sony particularly are looking at the climate of cinema, and they're seeing the DC universes and the Marvel stuff and Disney empires and Star Wars. And they're going, Ghostbusters can have this. And it's like, no, for various reasons. One, because of what the first film was. Two, because, you know, it's been hard to capture that lightning. And three, honestly, it's been too long. And I think now, Ghostbusters is stuck in a very weird position where what was once a unusual success story that came out of the blue and was very different from what was largely being presented to audiences at the time, now seemingly has this burden to be a franchise. And I don't know if it works, certainly on film anymore, because half the conversations I've had is, I maybe could have bought this whole plot and maybe story if it had been a 6-part HBO Max show. where you could go into detail and tell more of the story and let it breathe and find out more about these characters and maybe slowly bring in the Gozer stuff, because by the time you get to episode 10, you need a big finale. It's like the way they dealt with Ash versus Evil Dead. Let's do 8 episodes of what you know, but the last 2 episodes are in the cabin because everyone wants the cabin. And it feels like that story might have been better served as a 10-part episode of something. But as a movie, to me, it just came across as like insecure and pandering, and all the good stuff in it is, for me personally, because I know people have loved this film and taken, I don't want to take anything away from their experience, but for me, it was just like, it doesn't work for me, this.
Obviously, one of the biggest reveals, I suppose, was that, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson are back in it. I mean, that was spoiled, I think, maybe a year ago with, like, the release of the toys, like, early screenshots of what they were going to be putting out, and you just saw these characters with grey hair. I was like, oh, great, okay, well, they're in it, so you can't really, that sort of anticipation is kind of being sort of subdued a bit. It was nice seeing them, don't get me wrong, but it was like, oh, they're old and out of shape, you know what I mean? And it was just like, oh, yeah, fine, yeah, because they're like really old guys now. I mean, Ernie Hudson, he still looks pretty good for his age.
Oh, fantastically so.
I know, and it felt like Ghostbusters 2 again, because they just get hit and they're on their asses straight away. Yeah. And Bill Murray is funny in that moment, though, because he's just trying to sort of play along, and then
I think in the script,
it sort of has a bit of deadpan comedy there.
This is what I'm saying. I think that's also the curse of that finale, because I've got 2 points to say on that. One is, I think when they went, right, we've got Murray, he's agreed to do it. Yay! What should we write for him? We don't. Leave a gap in the script and let him do what he wants to. Because, when he comes in and he's like, oh, I thought we broke up. It was like, that's what I missed. That tone.
Yeah.
It's the tone. Then it was like, oh, but it's sad to see old people do it now, because even though it was nice to have that energy back, and it really is, I can see why it works, because when they're on screen again, there's that pang of, oh, bless them. They're all in the jumpsuits again.
Yeah.
And then that energy is nice, but then it's kind of distracting to the actual threat that's meant to be happening at the same time in the cornfield. So it kind of feels like squeezed in, but then I go, that's what this film's been missing. It's been missing the tone of Ghostbusters, because you can put all the Ghostbusters iconography you want in it, but I think most people like the tone of that film. They like the cut of its jib.
Yeah. I think Afterlife, it was definitely a different tone to it, but I think it's very consistent throughout. It doesn't have the same sensibilities of the 84 film because of its like complete shift in. One, it's the kind of location, but also how things are written. And in terms of the photographic style as well is going to be different anyway, because you've got a different colour palette. But it was... You're right, though. Once kind of Bill Murray starts talking, it's like, that is kind of Ghostbusters. Even if it's such a short little moment, it's like, that kind of... That gets it right there. And it's also nice, actually, that Winston's character, despite being sort of pushed aside for so many years, sort of the marketing is always focused on the 3 guys, really. In the video games, they sort of get rid of Winston, and it's nice now that he has the most success out of the Ghostbusters and has sort of supported them through, well, especially Ray throughout the years.
I think that's similar to the IDW comics. I think they frame Winston in the same kind of way, especially when it came to Ghostbusters International. I'd have to reread those, though.
It's also good as well, actually. They do use the Ghostbusters theme at the end and play it out in full. And to my surprise, and I was very happy they didn't do a remix. It was just like, here's the Ghostbusters tune. This tune is timeless, doesn't need changing.
Here's where we differ on that opinion. First of all, yes, I'm glad they didn't remake it or anything like that, but I did hear Kelly Clarkson's version of it a few weeks ago when they were on the show and she did a Ghostbusters special, and she fucking knocked it out the park. If she ever decided to release a Ghostbusters track, I'm all for it, right? The problem is not that they used the theme in the film. It's because they used it at the end. And here's why it's fundamentally broken, right? Here's Paul Gannon's bullshit reason why Ghostbusters Afterlife is broken, right?
Okay.
One of the things I think Ghostbusters has, and not a lot of people remember, but they certainly don't factor into it until they rewatch them, is that they kind of have a James Bond cold open. Because you know the first one's in the library,
Yeah.
and then it attacks, and then as she's screaming, the music rolls in, and then the logo comes in, and you're like, you're in, you're there, right? And Ghostbusters 2 has something similar, right? And Ghostbusters 2 has the pram sequence and the truck, and she grabs the baby, and the sign swirls in, and it's maybe not as effective, but it still shows you that they're in. You've dropped into the story. You're in media res or whatever you want to call it. Ghostbusters 2016 drops the ball because it does it almost completely perfectly right, but then doesn't show the logo and just cuts to generic opening title sequence credits. And I'm like, weird. And so when the Egon thing happened at the beginning and he gets attacked, and
I was expecting it to pop up there.
the logo should have popped up then, and the song, and then you're in, and then I guarantee you get more grace out of it, because dropping it in at the end is awkward, because all of a sudden they're on the floor in the farmhouse going, let's clean ourselves up and talk about what we did here today. And then it instantly cuts to a shot of New York Bridge, badly framed in the dark, so you can't really see what's going on.
That shot is only on for like a couple of seconds, then the credits come up. I'm like, wait a minute, this is a bit of abrupt edit.
It's even worse than that, because they bring in the song a little bit later than they drop in the edit. So the song doesn't even kind of smash cut into the film or go to Ghostbusters. It kind of all fumbles out the gate, and then you're into your first post-credit sequence where it goes, here's what we'd like to do for the sequel. Please come back.
Well, yeah, it's that nice little moment, because it said, like, with Sigourney Weaver. So where the hell is she? And then also it's that little post-credit sequence where she's playing the mind trick game he does in the first one.
I hated that.
It was a bit... was a bit... I mean, it obviously shows you that Sigourney Weaver still looks gorgeous for her age. She's aged gracefully.
Yeah.
And then you got Bill Murray, just completely tired and weathered. Smoked too much pot throughout his years. Just like, yeah, doesn't care. But it's Bill. That's what you love about him. He doesn't give a shit.
But didn't it feel like that film was there to apologise for the film's original scene, that it did that? To kind of say, oh, Venkman's a sexist and he was blah, blah, blah. And it was like, yeah, we know that. The character doesn't need to apologise for it.
No.
Why are you doing that? It's weird. But okay, so I will say this because I don't want to forget this, right? No matter what I think of Ghostbusters Afterlife, and for me it didn't work, and that's fine. I can't like everything, but guess what? I've got hours of other Ghostbusters stuff I do enjoy. That's fine, right? You can't win them all, personally speaking. What I will say is, I hope the film's a success, because I would love to see a sequel, because they have to do something new, and I want to know what they do without all that baggage they had to clear out.
Well, yeah, at the end of the film, that's sort of, we see the ghost trap sort of flashing, the containment unit. Which
makes no sense, because it was meant to be a Starbucks up until recently, right?
Well, yeah, that is... Yeah. Okay,
anyway, yeah.
Another fault to the movie we could add to the list, but... you can say, you can pick it apart very easily and sort of say, well, that don't work. This is just a very clumsy kind of constructed movie.
But I think the problem is that this plot makes the simple plot of Ghostbusters now far more convoluted. Do you know what I mean? It's like the first film's very, very simple, and people forget that the plot doesn't really kick in until about an hour into the film, where it goes, oh, there's a demon and it's coming through. It's like, oh, all right, well, we've got half an hour, let's sort this out.
Well, yeah, but also there's no explanation about how the gear was really made and what it kind of... It's not savvy about the tech at all. It's just equipment they use.
Yeah.
And that is just like... It's not even a subplot. It's just like, okay, we've got the gear, let's go do some ghost busting.
Let's give this a go. Yeah.
Where nowadays, writing, people want so much more, explained to them. They have to sort of go into depth about certain things, and that can sometimes take away some of the magic of it. Where, when they do prequels to movies, they explain the character's backstory. We don't need to know the backstory. It was just kind of told to us kind of loosely. That is enough.
And that's why I would urge for an original villain, because it would have given Phoebe her own journey, her own story, and not... I mean, one of the things... here's the thing. I don't want to talk about 2016 too much, because I think it's a completely different bag of kettle of fish, right? But Paul Feig's main point was, I don't want these women to inherit Ghostbusters stuff. I want it to be their journey. And for better or worse, he does that in that film. And I think Phoebe, obviously, because of the nature of the story, she has to inherit this. She's a science whiz. There was very little of her putting her spin on the Ghostbusters equipment to kind of say, oh, my grandfather did it wrong, I would do it this way and solve the mystery that way. It seems to be reliant on all the things that just worked in the first film, such as Ray, Peter and Winston cross the streams to capture Gozer. And I was like, that's not how that works, right? Because in the first Ghostbusters, the proton beams go right through her, and you cross the streams just to close the doors to reverse the polarity or whatever. So Stop crossing the streams, please. You don't need to do it. It's just, I liked Phoebe so much, and McKenna Grace is genuinely amazing in this film. And the chemistry she had with Podcast, a character I didn't like at the beginning, but very much warmed to at the end, because he basically became a little Ray.
Oh, yeah.
I want more of that in the sequel. I want more of that. I want Gary Gooberson to be, like, with a proton pack on. The fact they didn't give Paul Rudd a proton pack is the single biggest crime of this film. You know what I mean?
I would have loved to have seen that, because it's like, as an adult, you kind of want to sort of see a somewhat a variation of another Ghostbuster at that age, sort of.
Because he's meant to be the surrogate, he's more of an audience surrogate or a fan surrogate.
Yeah.
So, when he gets excited with the trap, can you imagine an awesome scene where he strolls out with a proton pack, he's all suited up, and then he pulls it and it doesn't work, and it's a bit of a funny moment, or, did something like that to kind of have him have some payoff.
Well, yeah, it's because it's all about having the kids kind of interact with this equipment, and there's a great moment when they encounter that ghost, which is basically Slimer, but eats loads of metal.
Yeah,
it's quite it's set during the day as well, which is a little bit like does dilute some of the sort of setup of horror. But they hear the noise of it, and Phoebe's like, "What's that?" And Podcast goes, "It's a couple of pigeons. Give me the gun." So it's this sort of quick. He just wants it off. He wants the gun.
See, that sequence I loved as well. That sequence where they're burning through town trying to chase Muncher. I was like, that's honestly what the kids have come for if they're going to see a Ghostbusters movie. They're not really here to make sure you get the fidelity to the plot of 84 right. And it's like, that's one of those scenes in the film that really came to life for me. And again, it's literally this Walmart scene onwards, which kind of retroactively ruined the rest of the film for me.
The movie sort of throws in Shandor, right? And it's sort of more of the backstory. Doesn't explain much of it, though, which I think they should have had more of that discussion in the sort of the diner, where they're sort of explaining what's going on. Because I wanted more of that sort of mystery there to unravel. But we do see him come to life when they're inspecting the sort of the temple, as it were. It has a little bit of a Goonies vibe to it, which I thought was very cool.
Yeah.
But once we see him come to, like, J.K. Simmons, as
I know, right?
Right. Okay.
And was it Olivia Wilde as well as Gozer?
No. It's my girlfriend thought that was Olivia Wilde, but it's someone else. I think. Oh God, it's another actress, but.
No, fair enough. It just looked like it.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, I don't think they did a pretty good job with the sort of the makeup style, but the eyes I think should have been red and they're kind of all black.
Yeah, and I like the kind of glowing orbs inside of her body floating as if she was like, you know what I mean? It made her look ethereal. I did like that design.
But when J.K. Simmons kind of pops up and starts talking, he just gets pulled apart by Gozer. It is very kind of like a bit like tissue paper just getting pulled apart. But I felt, wait a minute, shouldn't there have been more dialogue there?
Tons, right? What was all that about?
It feels like they've cut loads out. Well, to my eyes, that didn't. It's all very choppy.
It's really choppy in the back half.
As it's kind of rushing to the end.
It's funny as well because like I didn't understand the logic of the mine. So like it was a functioning mine. It was run by Shandor, but he run it under so he could get the second portal. He could find the second portal with the ley lines or whatever it was. And then it's abandoned because it was the town's industry and it ruined the town. So my questions are: anyone can seemingly get into that place because it's not very well secured. So how did no one notice a massive glass coffin with J.K. Simmons in for the best part of, I don't know, 50 years maybe? Who left him there? Who put him there? What?
Yeah, and how did he manage to sort of stay
alive?
Well, yeah, that didn't really make much sense. They should have had like maybe Shandor, his ghost form could have been influencing Phoebe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, here's the interesting thing, because they use Shandor in the video game, but it's interesting because I think in the video game, it's like he's crossed over and he is now, or I think he thinks himself as a god. So, he gets what he wants, I think. Something like that. Again, I might be completely wrong.
Yeah, he is in the video game, and he's deployed like in a sort of integral to the story, and I think... And
it works there.
I think that works in the game. It works in the game.
Yeah. But with this, it's like, okay, so he died, but was left in a coffin by this gate, which was fine, but not fine until Harold Ramis turned up and guarded it with a It just makes... I don't understand the logic of it, ultimately. And J.K. Simmons might have had dialogue that explained all that, and we might never know.
There may be a director's cut, we never know.
I'd be interested to see it, if there is one.
Well, because it was delayed for like 4 times since its original release date. You think they would have maybe sort of gone over it so many times and gone, okay, this bit is a bit choppy. Let's kind of expanded a little bit. 'Cause it's the longest Ghostbusters film, isn't it?
Is it?
Like 2 hours and 4. It's longer than the first two.
You know what? I will say this then for it. It didn't feel like that for me. It didn't feel like a 2-hour film, to its credit. But so here's my theory. I just don't think Jason Reitman's right for this kind of film. I think it's interesting that the film seems more successful when it's really kind of low key and it's just a few characters talking or small interactions. I think it's obvious that when we get to, again, the Walmart scene onwards, I think he throws that out to his second unit mostly, or he throws it out to the effects guys. And I think that shows. It's like when you get a bad Bond stunt coordinator, or you know what I mean? And it's like, it's something off because the beats aren't there anymore. It's that kind of vibe.
Well, it did demonstrate that Jason is not, action is not his forte. So, yeah, second unit guys would probably handle that. But I think because it's dealing with a family, you're dealing with a smaller set of characters, right? Well, the story itself is kind of people trying to reconnect with their family, and you're in a smaller town. So the scale is kind of shrunk down as well. So when it goes to the big stuff at the end, it goes big, but then it shrinks down again. Going from battling Gozer in New York on a massive kind of skyscraper-style building with massive Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, this is epic, right? You then got Gozer coming back and just fighting in a field, which is, on paper, it's such a, even visually, it's such a small-scale kind of finale. And it's all kind of covered in close-ups, generally, to sort of hide the fact that they're basically on a green screen.
It's strange. You can tell that it's all been filmed in different corners of a studio set, because all the Ghostbusters are in one corner, all standing close together behind a car. And then, there's the car set with Podcast and Trevor, and then everyone else is on the kind of, the front lawn of the house. And it's like nothing feels connected. Like they've tried to figure out how to tell the story as quickly as possible, but with maximum impact. And it's funny because, when you watch Ghostbusters, and it's something that the following films have never got right, is that they never captured the gothic horror of New York in that film, because it's a great New York movie, but when you look back on it visually in your head, it's almost like you're looking at a graveyard of tombstones, So you see these buildings rising out like big monoliths in a gravestone. It's got a really gothic vibe to it. And I was surprised they didn't lean into the American Gothic of the country in this as well, and lean into, the weirdness or the creepiness, the kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre-y stuff.
The house and the barnyard have this kind of creepiness to them, but it's very sort of, sort of stereotypical of that sort of horror element where it's like a house out of Psycho. You know what I mean? It felt like, and they refer to Egon as the dirt man or the dirt farmer or something like that.
Yeah. It's just, I think ultimately they just needed to tell a smaller story. That's it, because they have the idea, the heart's in the right place. Because I generally believe the heart's in the right place. I just think it was misguided that they lent so heavily into making you remember 84. I just feel, give Phoebe a smaller story, give her own challenge, let her add something to the franchise or the world of Ghostbusters. So when you get to the end of it, you've got a whole new clean slate, This just feels like such a waste. Obviously it's been very, it's doing very well at the box office, which is great, apparently at the moment. But it just feels like, seriously, it's the most frustrating cinema experience I think I've ever had in my life.
Oh God! I feel so sorry for you, Paul, because I know, because we've talked about this a lot, just through Facebook or whatever, or our chats where we meet up. But it's your love for the franchise and what you're expecting with this, and just sort of hearing you sort of sound somewhat heartbroken.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's it's quite sad. It's but we've all been through this. I think all of us fans have fallen in love with certain film franchises, and they do a sequel or do a prequel, and it's not what you want, and it's kind of relying too much on nostalgia just to sort of please you in a very sort of superficial way. And just to sort of get that quick reaction. Perhaps over time, this film, for those who hated it, may sort of warm to it, or for those who kind of loved it, may see past that nostalgic stuff and go, oh, there isn't much to it apart from just repeating certain elements. So I think there's going to be a lot more to explore about this in future when we sort of look back on it, and hindsight becomes a becomes a topic of discussion. Really,
It'll be very interesting to see what happens next, because. It's done well at the box office. Weirdly, it's Well, okay, so here's the funny thing. People have been going, oh, it's doing very well. And it is, but it hasn't grossed as much as the 2016 movie did in its first weekend. The difference is Ghostbusters Afterlife was made considerably cheaper than 2016. And so 2016, you know what I mean? It's like, how many feet did it need to shoot itself in? But at least with this, there's less risk. So in many respects, this feels like a film that is there to keep the franchise going until hopefully another director and writer comes on and does something different, because I want the Reitmans out. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I admire and I like their work, but like, if you want this thing to grow, it can't become a Reitman corner shop where they just give roles out to family members and this, that, and the other, and a deferential to something made over close to 40 years ago now. It really, if it's going to grow, they're going to have to take risks of some kind.
There's two things I want to ask you before we sort of finish up. Now,
before I go for a cry and reevaluate my fandom of life.
So you mentioned the 2016 film, right?
Yeah.
If the 2016 film didn't come out, would the fan service be somewhat justified in this, or not seen as too over the top?
I think if this film had been in the film that came out instead of 2016's film, I think I'd have the exact same reaction.
Okay.
I think one of the reasons why, and this is just me throwing a wild theory out into the wind, is because of the very, very diverse opinions on Paul Feig's film. And because of the heavy-handed nature of the nostalgia plays in this film, I think a lot of people have come out going, I've been baptized in the things I love. And it's given them a lot of the things the 2016 movie didn't give them. That's the crutch of all problems with modern mainstream blockbuster movies now, is that, are you giving them what they want, or are you giving them what they've already got? And for me, Afterlife was something I've already got, and it's better, the version I like, you know.
That's totally fair enough, and that's justly put, I would say. It's a business though, isn't it? They don't want to make money. And they see if we can somewhat play it safe and give the fans what they want, well, you're providing a product that what they want.
But you think about like Star Trek films or Bond films, or those franchises of the kind of 80s and 90s that only had to exist film to film. You know, they never really had to do anything but worry about the next film if it happened. It feels like I miss those kind of films where, oh shit, Bobby Sock's Big Adventure in Pantstown was a huge success. Let's get a sequel. It's like, yeah, let's see where this goes. I kind of miss that. I don't know if I particularly like the world of cinema where it's all more like a comic book now. Where it's like, you have to know this and it has to do that and it has to be referential to this. And it's like, no. Remember the 80s when we had Gremlins and Back to the Future and Ghostbusters and Big Trouble in Little China and Goonies and Indiana Jones and Star Trek, and it's all the wealth of new things washing over us every summer. And it's like, I miss being disappointed by new things.
That's totally fair enough. And finally, people have said, including the ghost of Harold Ramis, and featuring very heavily near the end, thankfully they don't make him talk.
Yeah, good.
Having someone do an impersonation of Harold would have been a bit like, oh no, it wouldn't have been wise. But do you think it's somewhat in bad taste? Even though we do know that Harold Ramis' family, especially his daughter, very much, I think, was involved with this and gave them their blessing. So to them, it may not be seen as that. But do you think a large majority would be like, I said, you've gone a little bit too far here?
So here's where I stand on that subject. I think no actor, once they're dead, should be brought back for a film, right? I think it's not right. In any case, I find it ghoulish. Whether it's Peter Cushing in Rogue One or whatever the bloody hell it was. I personally find it ghoulish. That being said, I was surprised by how tasteful it was done in Ghostbusters Afterlife up until the ending. Do you know the shot where he's holding her hand and it looks like all that artwork Ghostbusters fan made when Ramis died all those years ago? It was like, I've drawn him going up to heaven. It's like, yeah, they filmed that now. That shot where he's holding her hand and the proton pack was enough.
Right. Yeah.
That was enough. They kept it.
I didn't know they could hug ghosts. I mean, because she hugs her dad. At the end, I thought, no, that was a bit Weird.
Egon's the only ghost in the whole Ghostbusters universe that just goes, I'm off to heaven now, and sprinkles into stardust and goes up into the sky. I was like...
Well, yeah, that was a bit schmaltzy. That is like Spielberg up to 11, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, this isn't Starman. You know, it's just...
Starman. Oh my
all
God,
it needed was the sense that Phoebe knew he was there. Because that's all that really mattered in terms of that character. And it wasn't like they came in to save the day, but it was nice to kind of have that little beautiful moment of her standing her ground, firing that proton beam, and just seeing the hand come in to steady her aim. That was so perfect that everything after that, for me, went instantly to ghoulish. All those takes of Bill Murray staring at the CGI Ramus, and that was like, no, you've wasted that now. But that's just me. Again, that's just me. I'm a cynical, dead inside human being who seemingly can't be pleased these days with anything, let alone Ghostbusters projects. So, with all that being said, it's a C+ for me at the most.
C+.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Well, yeah, I mean, I rated the film 4 out of 5, like the highest, possibly a 3.5. After chatting with you, Paul, and the things you pointed out, I don't think it's really affected my rating. I do want to see it again.
Good.
Because I think ultimately, you know, when you first reaction to a movie is always often a little bit like you're going to be sometimes you can be overly positive, or you're not remembering things completely correctly. No longer fresh after a few days. You need to sort of see it again to sort of really compute everything. But I'll say I wasn't overly annoyed by the movie. I was really entertained by it, but there was, as I say, kind of nagging moments. And I do think the ghostly Harold Ramis was a little bit too much, and it just needed the nostalgia is very much up to 11 in this, and if it was taken down on the old PK meter, down a little bit, down to like 6, then I think people would have been less sort of frustrated and flustered by the sort of constant prodding at, like, hey, it's the South Park analogy, wasn't it? In the member berries.
It kind of feels like, if there's one example that backs their arguing up, it's sadly this one. And it's kind of this is the thing, I don't hate the movie. I'm not in the rage camp. I'm not here to shout people down or take away their experiences. I left confused and kind of bummed out, and I'm still processing that. And I can only tell you that was my gut reaction to seeing that film. And maybe it will grow on me in time. I don't know. But right now, I don't know.
What I would love is just like if someone like the news, whatever, had interviewed fans back in '89, walking out of Ghostbusters 2, and just vox popping with them and saying, "What did you think?" Just to hear their opinions.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
That would be really sort of telling.
Yeah.
Of what people thought at the time and how opinions have changed. And it's still the same with like Episode 1, Star Wars, where people came out going, "It's amazing!" They completely regretted saying that, like, months later or maybe the following day, thinking, "Oh my God, what was I thinking?" I still remember like Matrix Reloaded coming out and people walk out in the cinema.
Oh, wow, yeah.
MTV covered it and they were like, "It's better than the first one, it's the best sequel ever." You think, really? Yeah. You go to see it and think, no.
Yeah. Bless them for trying, but yeah. I will say this though, some guy on Twitter did something that really annoyed me, and the Twitter quote was basically, critics are shit, don't listen to critics, it's the fans that matter, what do critics know? And then he posted up Rotten Tomatoes captions where it was like, Ghostbusters, critics 80%, audience 90%, Ghostbusters 2, rating 60, this. And then it was like Ghostbusters 2016, 74%, lower, audience 1. And then Ghostbusters Afterlife, 64% on Rotten Tomatoes and high audience. And he was like, this proves it. And I was like, no, it proves nothing, because people like shit movies and people hate great movies. I don't like The Shining, for example, but I wouldn't call it a shit movie. I just don't like it. You're allowed to like something you hate, and you're allowed to hate something others like, and that's just the way the world goes. There shouldn't necessarily be a line in the sand that people have to draw to say you're with us or against us, because it's a fucking movie, right? Your life should not be based on what critics say.
Well, people often like to live and die by the ratings, and that's the only thing they can sort of judge a movie on.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you are left baffled by some reviews, where I did read one on this film where it had 1 out of 5, and I was like, really?
Is that the Guardian review?
Yeah, I thought there's somewhat an embarrassing review, but
I agree. I agree.
It was a bit of a shambles. But and then you start to, read other reviews, and they're a little more, certainly more balanced and a bit more fair and a bit more kind of honest. And you think, okay, this is a 3 out of 5 movie. Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah, I would even say that. It's a 3 out of 5. What doesn't work for me is a personal thing, but in terms of what it is, it's a 3 out of 5. What I don't understand is people who think reviews deserve to be better. It's like Drew McQueenie, what's his name? He's an online film journalist. Drew McStreeny, anyway, he wrote a review, and I basically agree with all of it, where he was confused as I was. And I was like, if any review I have to kind of stand by, I would probably stand by that one. It's kind of got the best mix of here's what works, here's what I don't understand and confuse me. And that's kind of where I stand. I neither hate it or love it. I'm confused by it, and I don't know what I do with my life next.
Well, there you go, folks.
Please follow me, by the way, on Twitter for all the latest Ghostbusters fans and opinions.
His opinions are his own.
My book's going to be awful now. The last few chapters are going to be a right bummer.
The depressing saga of Paul Gannon.
Yeah, right. I am the Reginald Perrin of Ghostbusters fans. I think that's what it comes down to.
Pretty much, man. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'm sure me and Paul will be back to discuss more films in the future. And if you have any opinions on the movie, leave a comment below.
Well, this is the thing. At the end of the day, please go make your own opinions, because no matter what I say or you say or you read, at the end of the day, you won't know what you think until you sit down and watch it. And if you don't want to watch it, then shut your mouth.
Spot on, Paul. I hope they make a sequel to this, and
me too,
and continue with these characters.
Genuinely hope they do.
Do something new. I don't know what villain they'd bring back.
I joked that what they'll do is they'll find a negative of Vigo in the basement of the firehouse, and then Trevor will open it up and pre-print it out. But this time he comes out of your phones, something like that.
Maybe just bring a villain in from the cartoon.
Oh yes, like the Sandman or something, or
oh yeah,
the Bogeyman. That's the good one.
Exactly, that'd be fun.
Or I would take Murray the Mantis, actually, as well, if you're going to do
that. Well, everyone, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.